everyone, welcome back to the deep dive. You know how sometimes the smallest thing can have huge consequences? Like that whole butterfly effect idea, a butterfly flaps its wings and it ends up causing a hurricane across the world.
Crazy.
Totally. Well, that's kind of what we're talking about today. But instead of butterflies, it's the George Floyd protests and the global movement it sparked.
Yeah, we're diving into a documentary essay that really breaks down the events leading up to the protests and then all the ripple effects.
It gets kind of heavy, so just a heads up.
Yeah.
But like always, we're here to explore, not to preach. Our goal is to understand what went down and how it changed things, not tell you what to think.
Exactly.
So let's get into it. The essay starts with that moment everyone remembers, George Floyd's death. And a big reason we all know about it is because of that video someone took.
It's kind of chilling when you think about it.
Yeah.
What if that person hadn't hit record? Would we even know his name? Would there have been any justice?
It's a haunting thought for sure. And it makes you wonder how many times something like this might have happened before without the world ever knowing.
That video, as awful as it was, forced people to pay attention.
Yeah.
This wasn't something you could just ignore.
Right. And the essay makes it very clear. This was not an isolated incident. Sadly, we've seen this kind of thing before. Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery.
It's heartbreaking because it's true. We almost become numb to it because it keeps happening.
And that's the thing. The essay really digs into how George Floyd's death was the spark, but the fuel was years and years of racial injustice and police brutality against Black Americans.
Exactly. Remember Eric Garner? I can't breathe. It was years earlier. And it's the same cry, showing that this is a deep-rooted problem, not a one-time thing.
So each case, each name we know, and probably even more that we don't, just built up this tension, like a powder keg waiting to explode.
And that's what I found so fascinating about this essay. It connects the dots between all these different incidents and underlying issues that were building up to this boiling point. You know what I mean?
And it's amazing how these protests weren't just about George Floyd anymore. It became about so much more so quickly.
Right. It was like his death shone a light on everything. Yeah. And suddenly you have all these other issues bubbling up to the surface.
Exactly. Police brutality was just the tip of the iceberg.
Right.
You had people talking about racial profiling, the whole prison system, even representation in movies and TV shows. Did the essay get into any specific examples of how all these different issues were coming together in the protests?
Oh, yeah, for sure. One thing it talked about was how that Black Lives Matter chant became such a powerful force.
Yeah.
It's such a simple phrase, but
it says so much, right?
Exactly. It's like this demand for recognition, for equality, for basic human rights.
Yeah.
And it resonated with people all over the world.
Yeah, the essay called it a global ripple effect, didn't it?
It did. Which I thought was really interesting because it wasn't just happening in the US, right? We saw protests in Europe, in Asia, all over the place.
It was huge, and it forced other countries to have some tough conversations about their own histories with race and colonialism. You had those statues being torn down in England and Belgium, people debating about reparations for slavery.
Like I said, ripple effect. It all started with that one event, but it spread out and made a lot of people uncomfortable.
The essay even compared it to a hurricane, you know?
Yeah. The perfect analogy. It starts small, like just a little disturbance, but then it picks up speed and turns into this unstoppable force.
And no one can ignore it at that point.
Okay.
So we've got the spark, the ripples going out across the globe. But what about concrete changes here in the US? Did the protests actually lead to any real change?
That's the big question, right?
Yeah.
Did anything really change? And honestly, it's hard to say. The essay doesn't pretend it's easy. There were some positive things that came out of it, for sure.
Like what?
Well, for one, you had the Derek Chauvin trial,
Yeah.
him being convicted of murder. That was huge.
Definitely felt like a turning point, like finally some accountability.
Right, it was a landmark case. And there were other changes, too. Some police departments changed their policies, banned chokeholds, started using body cameras, more.
Which people had been wanting for a long time.
Exactly. It wasn't new demands, but suddenly people were listening. Then you had all these companies putting out statements about diversity and inclusion, promising to do better.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. It seemed like every brand had something to say. But did any of it actually stick? Or was it just words?
That's the thing.
Yeah.
The essay makes a good point about how a lot of the changes were kind of surface level.
Surface level.
Like they looked good on paper or made for a nice headline, but they didn't really address the root causes.
So like putting a Band-Aid on a broken bone.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
The essay argues that real change needs to be systemic, not just cosmetic.
Which makes sense. I mean, you can't just change a few rules and expect everything to be fixed overnight.
Exactly. It's a process. A marathon, not a sprint.
Speaking of long journeys, the essay ends on these what-if questions that really got me thinking.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
Well, one of them was, What if the police had cracked down even harder on the protests? What if they'd met those demonstrations with even more force? How would things be different?
And on the flip side, what if they'd listened more? What if they'd really engaged with the protesters' demands? Would we have seen more progress?
It's kind of mind-blowing to think about all the different paths things could have gone down. Makes you realize how important those moments of protest and speaking out really are.
Absolutely. And it's not just about those big moments either. It's the everyday choices we make too. Like the essay says, it's all connected.
So true. Well said. On that note, we'll leave you with this. Those butterfly wings are still flapping. What choices will you make knowing that even the smallest actions can have a big impact? Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. It's been intense to say the least. But hopefully it's given you some food for thought. Until next time, keep asking questions, keep learning, and keep pushing for a better world.